Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Mowing After Dark here on the College Football Mafia Network. I am joined by my co-host Rock and Rant, and tonight we have a special guest, the seer of all seers, the prognosticator of all
Oh
prognosticators,
boy.
Immaculate View. How you doing, Immaculate?
I'm good. How you guys doing? It's good to see you again.
Good, good. How are you
Good to
doing,
have
Rock
you.
and Rant?
I'm good. I'm definitely good. How about yourself?
I got smacked in the face with a poison ivy plant, so it's like
So
right
right here or
it's,
here?
yeah,
Just
it's like that
right
Tommy Boy.
here.
It's like right here.
Oh man, I was gonna say I thought you were getting ready for the season pretty fast, but you still got a couple of weeks for the game to get like the makeup on and everything.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just gonna go au natural. So we got a lot of stuff to cover today, guys. A lot of stuff. So I'm gonna say hi to some folks. We're gonna do a quick SEC breakdown of our SEC picks for this season where we have everybody standing. And then we are going to get into the meat of the subject. We are going to talk about conference playoffs. And let's just jump right in here. Buckshot Kid says, "Oh, hey, Moen. Good to see you, Buckshot Kid. Friends call me Sean. Got to give immaculate props. He was one of the first that I've heard to advocate for conference semis. We've had many conversations on this the last couple years. Shout out to Immaculate. Well, here he is.
Appreciate it, and I do know him, and we have talked about it.
Joaquin Morales says, hey, Moen and Mafia fam, smash the like button. It makes Moen happy. It does. Ryan Willie says, hi, CFM. COVID hasn't taken me out yet. We hope it doesn't, Ryan. Get to feeling better, dude. Get your rest. Nathan's in the house. Says, hi, guys. Good to see
What's
you.
going
on? Dallas Marquez says, let's go. Stormy Cyclones dealing with kidney stones. My prayers out to you, sir. I've heard
like
that's
General
mighty
Hospital.
painful.
I can tell you firsthand that is not fun at all.
Yeah. Timothy Green's in the house. MAGA's here. Antoine Codes. Kerry Go Knowles, again, giving immaculate props. First one I heard talk about conference semis and pods. Clay Johansson's here with the words I won't say. You can say that, Immaculate, if you want to.
Go blue.
Or, boy, you got the Hawkeye to say it.
Kind of, sort of, go blue.
Jan Hulk is here from Slovenia. Good to see you, Jan. Bob Swanger's here. Lana Ted's in the house. Mosito X is here. Good to see you, Mosito. Dallas Marquez says he's got Texas winning the SEC. CFB Plus is in the house. Good to see you, CFB Plus. Well, let's jump into it, Rock. Let's get our SEC picks up here on the stage. And just as a reminder, this is a conglomeration of everybody's pick. Mine, Sergeant Pickles, Becky Go Huskies, Rock and Rant, Nate, and Wild Ute. Immaculate had nothing to do with this, so don't give him any hate for this.
Don't come at me.
These are our predictions for the 2024 CFB Mafia SEC rundown. We've got Georgia at number 1. I don't think there's going to be any argument for it. I think that was a unanimous one. I think everybody had Georgia 1.
It was not unanimous. I know why. I know it was not because I had Texas.
Okay.
But I think it was either 4-2 or 5-1.
Yeah. It was pretty close.
Texas, both of them were 1 and 2. There was I don't think anybody had Alabama 2 or 1 or anything like that.
Yeah. So then we had Texas at second, which is, Texas went to the playoffs last year. There's no reason to believe that they're going to fall back at me, I don't think. And then we've got Alabama at number 3. Kalen DeBoer coming in, but they've got a whole new system and new coaches there, but they're doing well. Recruiting-wise, anyway. Ole Miss is number 4. I actually have Ole Miss as my sneaky pick to play in the college football championship game. I don't think they're going to win the SEC, though. I think they may make a run at that college football title game. Then we have LSU at number 5, which I think is a little generous. I don't know if they're going to play defense this year. If they do play defense this year, maybe. Missouri, I think, is a little too low. I had Missouri higher. I think they return a lot of starters. It's a fantastic team. Tennessee, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Auburn, Kentucky, South Carolina, Florida, Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt to round them all out. What do you think about this, Rock and Rant? What are your initial thoughts on it?
Yeah, I thought, when we got to some of the other conferences, once we got past the number 1 or 2, there was a wider spread on what the team thought, like places where there's a lot bigger things. There are, more schools where somebody had, somebody in the upper tier or second tier versus somebody else having them in the last tier. But the SEC was pretty consistent. I think I agree with you. LSU might be a little rich, but I think that's everything goes right for them ranking maybe, as opposed to, Brian Kelly does something Brian Kelly like, besides dance around weird with the recruit. And, Texas A&M has more talent than their ranking, but, we'll see if they can pull it off with the new coach. To me, that's the one that if I think could be underranked, it's possibly them, but that really depends upon a new coach bringing in the culture and if it's that easy to turn around. The Gators are maybe even too highly ranked, but they're about right. But I have to take a shot because it's just in my DNA, and I'm doing that for Carrie too.
Because they're the Gators. And I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for Oklahoma fans that we have Oklahoma at number 9. Guys, we don't know how they're going to perform in the SEC. I know how Texas performed in the SEC last year. They beat Alabama. They beat the SEC school. So I've got a lot more confidence in Texas in the SEC than I do Oklahoma. Best way to prove us wrong is to go out there and win. Immaculate, I know you didn't have anything to do with this, but does anything stand out here to you, or who do you have as your sneaky pick in the SEC?
The team that I'm pulling for is Ole Miss, but they've had some issues with the roster. I don't know really where they stand right now. So I'm actually okay if they don't actually make it into the SEC championship game. And as you're saying, they just slide into the CFP that way. I guess maybe I'm kind of looking at them the same way that I'm looking at Iowa in that regard. A loss for either one of those teams in their conference championship game might be a pretty bad thing for them. So, if that's where they end up at, that's probably a great spot for them. LSU, I don't really know what's going on there, but it just kind of seems like people are still picking them based upon the brand name. And I'm not sure if the program's actually there. And once again, Missouri, as low as they are, but they just keep beating people. So they might be in that top 4.
Yeah, I think I have them in my top 4. I had Missouri there.
They might be ahead of Alabama. I don't know. Tennessee, they could be huge this year, or they could be overrated. And as an Iowa fan, I got to be careful on this because obviously what they did to Iowa. But that's a brand new quarterback that no one had any footage on, and now people have seen him, and they're going to start getting footage on him as the year goes by. So it's going to be interesting to see what that Tennessee team can do. It could be higher than that. They might fall out.
My sneaky Heisman pick for the SEC this year is Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss, although it might not be too sneaky. But I think he's really somebody you need to keep an eye on. I think he'll have a big year. Big stats coming out of Ole Miss.
He might be the best quarterback in the conference.
He might be the best quarterback in the country.
Might be.
We'll see. I mean, I think him and Quinn Ewers are both going to put up ungodly numbers, but I think he's going to have a big statistical season.
Yeah, they got some good ones there. You got Beck at Georgia still. So we'll see how it goes.
Dallas Marquez brings up Oklahoma beat Texas last year, but that's a rivalry game. So I'm throwing rivalry. Anything can happen in rivalry games, guys. Ohio State could lose to Michigan 3 years in a row. Anything could happen. So I take rivalries out of it. I don't put them into account. We saw Texas play Alabama, and they performed pretty well. So I don't think there's going to be a huge drop-off on that team. I think Steve Wilkes coach. Again, I don't think there's any doubt that Georgia is number 1. Kirby Smart hasn't lost a step. Recruiting hasn't lost a step. It's, to me, by far and away, Georgia is the number 1 team in America. Until
number 1 in your poll and number 1 in your, car accidents.
Yeah. Timothy Green says, I do not think there will be an undefeated team in the SEC this year, in my opinion.
Could be right.
You could be right going into the championship game.
Haven't looked at the
I
schedule.
think somebody might lose a championship game, but somebody might get in there undefeated.
Right. And the other thing that with these predictions, and I could be mistaken, but I'm not aware that I haven't seen where any of the tiebreakers are to the level. And when you have this kind of conference of these sizes now, with not everybody playing the same schedule, like those tiebreakers could alter a bunch of teams with the same record, and they may not even have played each other on the field, and somebody leapfrogs them for some other reason besides just pure scoreboard.
Right, and that's a fantastic segue, actually, because one way you can get rid of tiebreakers, Immaculate, conference semifinal game.
Imagine that.
Shocking.
And did you guys listen in?
I heard Greg's show the other night. I want to let you take your victory lap here. You've been talking about it longer than anybody else I know.
Yeah, I'm not very good at those. It's one of these things. I know everyone's kind of saying, hey, Immaculate talked about it, and I have, and we did on the show quite often, sometimes with agreement, sometimes disagreement. For me, it's just an old idea. This is the idea a lot of the people that I think in those conferences have wanted for a while. I know Delaney, when he left, he said something along the lines of one of his greatest regrets was allowing basketball to get out of the conference's hands with the big tournament and how it damaged the conference tournaments and their value. So I've always kind of held that if they could stop that from happening in football, that's what they'd want to do. They didn't really have rules from the NCAA that helped them. And we know they have governance coming. And that's why I was thinking that we wouldn't get this type of an announcement until after we get that governance. So that was very interesting to hear from Greg on this and how he was trying to explain how it might happen. Maybe that's all coming from his head. Maybe that's coming from someone else. Don't know. But it seems to me like the House settlement situation is getting pushed back. And so now they've probably been making plans to do this with the new rules, and now they realize they may not have those in place. So it's an intriguing idea on how to wrap it into the season so that they're not breaking any current rules in order to do this.
Well, and to be fair, we haven't actually heard
Have not yet.
an announcement.
Have not yet.
But this is clearly somebody's putting it out there to be socialized.
Yes, I think that there could be multiple reasons why someone maybe let him know first. My thought is kind of prepare the way, get everyone a little tuned up for it, watching, paying attention. People have been kind of burned out on all of this. I don't think that they're getting as many looks and views on their talk, with Dellinger and everything like that. Those guys can see that people just aren't paying as much attention right now, especially with the season coming up. So I think that was meant to kind of get people looking and paying attention. And as early as tomorrow, we might get hit with this. We'll see. If we don't get hit with it this week, I don't think it's actually true. So okay. I think it's either this week or it's.
Do you think it's for all conferences, one conference in particular, a couple conferences?
One of the reasons why I do like it, and I do have to caution myself a little bit on this because I do have some bias in this, is I think that this is the best solution for everybody. I'm not just talking Big Ten. I'm not just talking the SEC. I am talking Big 12, ACC, but I'm also talking G5. And if this comes to pass and we get this announced, that means everyone behind the scenes already knows about it. That means there's probably already some discussions going on. I do have two conferences in mind that I think would be where we'd see the first big moves. So this would be one of the dominoes of we've talked about, like things have to happen in a certain order because they release the way for the next thing to happen. And this is one of those. So we'll see. But yeah, I think this benefits everybody because postseason play, which even though right now they're working this into the regular season, that's until they get their rules. The pinnacle of this still is to have the conference postseason. And remember, that's demand heavy, supply light. So everyone's going to get a chance to sell. And, even though you may not be the Big Ten or the SEC as a conference, all these new networks that are getting into this, they still need the content for those weeks because there's no more, plethora of regular season games. There's a very limited amount of games available. And so, that's a buyer's or a seller's market. So that's great for other conferences.
Ruck and Rant, you're probably in one of these conferences that is going to make the first move. We know ACC, Big 12, chasing increased revenue streams any way they can find them. They could easily add the inventory of 2 more games. I don't know. How much value do you think 2 additional semifinal games would bring a conference?
Well, I think there's 2 things. I wonder if ACC is the first because your current state, no realignment, nothing's happened yet, just the current state. The 2 schools that are suing have their big end of season rivalry game. So I just wonder how they do all the scheduling. So I think that's still a question. Not so much the 1, 2, 3, 4, but all of that, and who has open dates. Going to do this and then still do your Florida State Florida game. Like, how do you do it if not every conference is doing it? It's just sort of weird if you gone through that and then you get hurt in your in between game. That's not going to impact. Doesn't impact your CFP playoff. Like what goes? Those are questions I still have. But to me, anything that lets the decision of who's making a playoff game and into a championship game happen on the field, as opposed to a random tiebreaker deciding things, I'm all for. And if that means you're doing this model where you're that last week or 2 there's a rearrangement on the schedule and there's flex to it, and we don't have to worry about points for, points against because 2 teams that didn't play each other have the same record, and we're going to the 4th tiebreaker. I'm kind of interested to that. I do think that some of the conferences will certainly get more revenue possibility, but they're going to have that conversation, right? It's just not an assumption. You're not giving more inventory. You're just in theory giving those those partners better matchups potentially. And we'll have to see whether that all shakes out and they're willing to actually pay for that, or if they're just trying to give the conference partners like the TV networks a better value. So, like in the ACC's case, if they're less likely to get slayed when they talk to ESPN about renewing by giving them a better product overall, despite the teams.
Immaculate, what do you think? Do you think this is a flex game where they just take one of their existing conference games and make this a semifinal weekend and then do a ranked matchup with the rest of the teams? Or do they actually add inventory here by saying, let's push our season back to week 0. We'll start our season week 0 with a conference matchup, then have these 2 individual semifinal games as 2 new games, new inventory to sell networks?
Initially, they have to. NCAA rules only allow for 1 postseason game. Okay. NCAA rules also only allow for 2 divisions. That's why they talk pods. Whenever you hear pods, I know we went over this a lot, but whenever you hear pods, it basically means subdivisions. It's a way to get around the 2 division rule. But yeah, no, that's when I heard him talking about that, I realized, okay, that's because they don't have the new rules to allow for a longer conference postseason yet. Do I think that's what it'll always be? No. But initially, if they actually do this, if they're thinking that they're not going to get their rules changed anytime soon, yeah, I think that they will just somehow wrap this into the regular season. I'll admit, when he was explaining this, I was trying to wrap my head around it, and I kind of got the gist of it and what the purpose is. But they would have had to have some guys really kind of diving into this deep to really make a lot of sense of it. But I get the general idea, and it does make sense as a temporary stopgap, if you would. It should improve the value of games that they offer, at least during those last couple of weeks of the season.
It's easier for a 16-team league to do it right now, and it's easier for a 20-team league just from the math. Like a 16-team league, you play the other 3 schools in your division. You play 3 or whatever from another division based off of some sort of record stuff, and then you have the flexibility for those last two in this, whoever wins divisions or, in pod, so to speak, play. Same thing happens. 20 is even easier. You can kind of almost follow the NFL model, but just build those games into the middle of to the end of the season, pending what Immaculate's talking about. Of course, the ACC has 17, so that means someone like, what do they do with that other team?
Well, Notre Dame doesn't count,
but it's 17. It's in I thought it was 17 with.
It's 18 with Notre Dame. It's 17 without. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So they have 17 football playing schools, not including Notre Dame. So then you have to deal with, like, well, if that school's still going to want to have X amount of games in their schedule, and if they're not part of that, like, how do you get them that game that late in the season? Do you have somebody on standby that just knows that they're going to be a victim from a G5 conference that's just going to randomly fly to play the 17th school that week when everybody else is doing something important?
Yeah, you bring up a great point. If this was a 20-team super conference, you could have 5, even let's just say the Big Ten. Big Ten adds Notre Dame and Stanford. You've got a West Coast pod. You've got a Central States pod, a Rust Belt pod, an East Coast pod. So, I mean, it makes sense to get back towards that geographical type of rivalries where you would have Penn State playing Maryland every year, Ohio State playing Michigan. My question is to you guys, what do you think the traditionalists in college football are going to take from this? Speaking for myself as an Ohio State fan, I want our last game of the season to always be against Michigan. Now I have to flex out of that.
Right. And you have and yours is in conference at least, which at least is theoretically easier. South Carolina, Clemson, not the case. Florida State, Florida, not the case. Fill in the blank around others. Like, it doesn't really impact Miami, Florida State. That has always moved. So we haven't been beholden to a date, but I don't know if I'm a traditionalist. You've already been, had gasoline, cover you, and they've already lit you on fire. So it's just like one more thing there. But I could see the Ohio State and Michigan have a lot of juice in the Big Ten, pushing back hard on that among other schools.
What do you think, Immaculate?
I think what they're doing is they've already been talking about doing this in terms of with divisions and with postseason. And I think with the settlement getting pushed back, it's kind of threw a little kink in the hose, so to speak. And so I think this is to try to stay on the track that they were going on. They'd have to figure out a way to do that. And so if they set it up like this, it might be like a year or two of, less than perfect. But if, say the settlement passes, it gets certified, boom, governance gets put in place, where I think it's going to go right on top of the autonomous conferences, and they'll just hit the ground running. Even if they start to talk about this and say that this is going to happen in, 2026, 2028, something like that, they'll probably still be able to get the rules in place, and then they can then just transfer from this idea to the more perfect idea. Which I know some people are thinking, they're doing this because they don't want to extend the season. They don't want to have more games. I'm calling BS on that one. I don't think they'll have a problem at all doing more games, especially once they start to pay these players. I think they are going to extend. And when people complain about this, say, well, that's where the money games are. These players are going to make even more off of it. So,
right. I think that's the key. Players would push back if you tell them they're going to get paid the same for a 60-hour work week as a 40-hour work week. But if you're bringing in more revenue for these other games, and therefore everything goes up, then then it fundamentally changes what that conversation is. If they try to jam stuff in and they don't increase the other revenue sharing pods, which doesn't seem like that would be the case, but then you'd have a lot of pushback. The flip side too, though, is if you add more onto an already 12-game season, and you're one of the few schools that gets into the playoffs and the actual CFP playoffs, you're approaching NFL length schedules.
Yeah.
With the amount of possible games, 12 plus 2, 12 plus a play championship game plus.
And they're increasing the scholarship rosters too.
Yeah. So you're starting to get a lot of, you might not have had to make the Super Bowl, but you're probably approaching conference championship level schedule for a few select teams as a result, if you do it all that way.
But you bring up a tough part about this that I still think a lot of people aren't going to be on when I'm saying this, but I still expect the CFP to actually be decreased in size. I don't think it was ever intended to be as big as it is. To us, we love it. I mean, it's great. To the people who are making these decisions, the administrators, look at the headache that it's been. Look at how many months and months and months they went through this, trying to get this figured out. And it is not over. They're now saying, oh, we're going to have to meet up again in 28 and redo this all over again. We still haven't even figured out what 26 is going to be. I think when they first made the CFP back in 2014, it was really just meant to be the cap on top of these conference playoffs. They just never got the rules passed that they thought they'd get.
Yeah, but it would be the first playoff that I know of in professional / college sports that somehow got drawn back downward.
It's really not, though. It actually gets increased. You got to look at these conference playoffs as part of that structure. So it gets increased in size by magnitudes, because you're talking these games now being played by every conference, and then leading into that, it's increased dramatically. It's not all called the CFP.
But one is based on your deals with your conference partner, right? And the CFP is sold completely separately.
Yeah, and if you get down to where, say, just conference champions are going in, it makes the fight over who's getting paid how much, it at least minimizes it. We're not talking about how many AQs we're getting and the numbers. You're getting down to a more similar amount. Like if everyone's getting in one team, well, it's a much different and much more simple conversation.
You're winnowing it down.
But you're not winning down the number of games that people are going to be able to watch. It's just each conference is now going to be able to sell themselves. Big 12 can sell their games when there's no games on. Like there's only going to maybe be 2 games from the Big 10 that week, maybe 2 games from the SEC. That's a lot of open windows. If you got TNT getting involved, you got CW involved, you've got Amazon, you got a lot of people trying to break in now. It should not be too hard to sell those games.
Let's get to some comments real quick here, because CFP Plus says, Greg said that a media partner who isn't broadcasting the championship game wants in, and that, in my opinion, whittles it down to Big or 12, the Big 10 or the Big 12. ESPN has exclusive rights to ACC, and if anyone else wanted to do this, they would have to buy it from ESPN, not ACC. So ACC wouldn't see any of that money unless ESPN gives it to them. And then Greg is actually in the chat here tonight.
Hoping he would.
Conferences also deep in discussion, and gaming CFP games played on non-traditional CFP dates on the calendar. Kind of reminds me of Maction a little bit, but
yep. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I mean, there's a lot of days you can throw this into.
Well, holidays too. I mean, like Labor Day weekend, we usually get one primetime game on Labor Day. You could possibly throw another 2 or 3 in there.
They could do what baseball did. Baseball used to have, only one game on certain, in the, have their focus game. And then, ESPN went to like 5 games on opening day on ESPN. There was still other games, but they were more local, and ESPN went all in. Or Christmas for the NBA, right? At one point was just one game, if I recall. And now it's like from the moment you wake up, at least if you're on the West Coast, but till you, put your toys away on Christmas Day.
Good point. Sooner in Texas wants us to pick Oklahoma to beat Texas and win the SEC, and I will subscribe for life. Refuse, and I will beat Texas. I will take my football and go home. I'm sorry. Look. Hey, prove me wrong.
I think it's possible. We'll see.
Well, it's possible. Sure, anything's possible.
I mean, it's Oklahoma versus Texas.
I can't remember because I was doing all the formulas and stuff, but Oklahoma fans might want to hold out getting mad until the top 25 comes out. I can't remember if we went super deep on the SEC or some people were drinking when they did conference versus the top 25.
All right, guys, let's talk about value add. If these are school, let's say it's the ACC and let's say it's the Big 12 for the sake of argument. We don't know. We'll say CFP Plus is right. that it is the Big 12 conference is doing this to add another revenue stream, what kind of value do you think you can put into those 2 additional games? What total do you think you could get from a network sponsor situation kind of deal? Any guesses?
I mean, if we're talking about this just being put into the season, you're just kind of adding incremental value, but it does add to them. I couldn't really begin to put a valuation to those. As Greg is saying in chat, he doesn't think we're actually going to get an announcement soon. We'll see how that goes. And I think that's when we might start to see numbers start to come out. For me, what this does is I think that this really starts to move the G5. And that's where you could really start to add a lot of value. Now, take a Mountain West. They just signed on with TNT. Take the AAC. They already have a deal with ESPN. So what happens if those 2 conferences merge? And now all of a sudden ESPN and TNT are going partners on that. Now, if you got, say, I don't know if it'd be like a 20 to 24 team league that's going in there now, how much value does that have? I think that those are the type of conferences that are going to see the most increase in value, because you don't even hear about them now. But if this is happening, this is going on during the end of the season, I think that those games where you double in the value,
Sure,
or more so. Yeah. I mean,
I think you're right there.
Yeah,
it could be like a 2 to 3x. I actually don't know that SEC necessarily is going. They might get it just because of that, but I don't know that they are going to get as much value out of it because they're packed with matchups all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But the definition of putting the playoff moniker on it, or the play into the championship game, you have like something, whether it's 2x, 3x, like who the hell knows? But I would use the equivalent of when we get to bowl season. You get certain conferences in the G5 who are never on ESPN, but when they get to their playoffs or their championship games, they move from streaming only to ESPN2, or from ESPN2 over to ESPN, or from a 9 a.m. slot on the West Coast, noon somewhere till 3. So there's some inherent value of like making something seem more special around it. But whether we could say it's definitively 2 to 3x their average per game ratio, I think is a little bit hard to monitor right now.
I think the higher you go up to the top, the less of a percentage it adds, even though the total value might be just as much or more. But I think the ones that are really going to be interested in this, and that's why people say in Big 12, I think that's probably the case. I mean, this sounds like a Yormark, like, hey, we've got, I'm just going to say it. I'm not saying this is true, but I'm just saying this. We got TNT talking to us, and we would like them to come on and be our number 1 partner. Why wouldn't ESPN and Fox do it? They're talking about having Venue Sports start up for this season.
This month.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's moving quickly. I mean, these are entities that are working together. And they're not really in a position to fully utilize this Big 12, which is now at 16 teams, which is going to have possibly a lot of competition across the board, a lot of games that matter. I think that's a perfect place for another network to come in and look at. So, of course, I think Yormark's saying, how do we, if we're going to figure this out, if we're going to talk to a TNT right now and try and figure out a deal, we need to know everything that's on the table. And so if this is something that they've been talking about doing, if it's getting pushed back due to the House settlement issues, they still need to get this figured out and in that deal, if that makes sense. So I think that's probably the one to watch, the Big 12, see how much value this adds for them. If they end up with TNT as their main network and with ESPN and Fox still getting specific games that they want out of there, doubling, that might not be too crazy of a thought. That might be where it's at, and this might be kind of the icing on the cake in order to make that deal happen.
Well, and keep in mind that they just announced this week, True TV is now Turner Sports.
Mhm.
It is now becoming Turner Sports.
It's going
it will be
full
a
sports.
dedicated sports network.
They need content.
Need content.
Yeah. I don't think it's coincidence. I mean, we all knew the venue was coming together and they were trying to do it as fast as possible, but I don't think it's coincidence that they made sure that normally you would probably not make an announcement like that when like everybody's eyes and ears are focused on the Olympics and Peacock. But I think they dropped it because everyone knows what Peacock has done with all this content and all these things going on simultaneously in one place. It was good timing for them to sort of drop that in. And, they might have already been aiming for a launch preseason, but to make it that announcement last week, I think they were riding the wave of people's engagement with Peacock during the Olympics, which is essentially just, another form of having all these games in one place and you can bounce around without having to like change a channel or go to 5 different apps.
Yeah, and I see some folks are kind of bringing up talk about breaking away. The reason why this type of stuff interests me so much is because this flies in the face of that. If you have conferences controlling more and more of their own content, having their own postseason take up more of the postseason content versus having something that's out of their hands, that's a stepping away from breakaways. That's having control over your own content and sales. That's not breaking away from folks. So I understand. I get like people are afraid of that or worried about that, or on the opposite side, they want it to happen. If this is really going on, if this is really happening, that's a big if. I think that this kind of flies in the face of Super League talk or the P2 breaking away and leaving the NCAA. I mean, this is leading us to saying like they are expecting to have that governance in place and to be able to make their own rules while within the NCAA. And that, I would hope, is good news for everybody.
There'd be some kind of irony of there being a breakaway to separate from everything as the two biggest broadcasters in sports are pulling everything together in one place.
Yeah, these breakaways and things like that, if you think these networks want that to happen, no way. They don't want to deal with one entity. They already know what happens with that. That's called the NFL kicking their butts around all over the place. They don't want that. The way college sports is a lot better for those networks than the way the NFL is set up. If you don't think that there would be a Super League network if that ever came about, think again. There absolutely would be. So I think that this is, for folks who are worried about that, I say this is good news if this is true.
Nick M says preseason polls are worthless clickbait. I just want to bring up, we'll do our preseason poll on Friday.
But to be clear, our preseason poll is not designed to think of. We're predicting who we think the top 25 is going to be at the end of the season.
Yeah,
right. We're not saying, well, here's what everything's starting off of. Like we're like trying to prognosticate where we think when we get to the end of it, it's all said and done. That's where we think people will land, as opposed to where we think they're starting. Yes, it's coming out in the preseason, but we specifically tried to not do that because we co-sign what that comment is. You can argue, half glass half full or half empty, but just so you know that we thought through that.
Yeah,
I'm
not a big fan of
Let me put this out here real quick. I see there's a lot of comments in the chat, guys. We'll try to get to the ones we can. I want to try and let Immaculate cook on this. This is his. I want him to take his victory lap. So I know we're not taking as many questions as we normally do or comments. That's the reason why. But keep putting them in the chat. And if we, Rock and Randall keep starring them. And if we can get to them, we can get to them. If not, they'll have to be super chats. That's the only thing I can guarantee on. All right, Immaculate, you can go back to what you were saying. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, in terms of preseason polls, I agree. Like, there's two different ways to go about it. There's those that are basically trying to set up the race with staggered starts. By being higher up in the polls, you have more room for, say, a loss and a slide. And so that's kind of the game that they play with polls. And I think that's why a lot of people, they see that, they sense that, and they don't like it. But if someone's having fun with a poll and saying this is how we think it's going to end at the end of the season, that's a different thing. That's just having fun. That's just predictions. As far as all the rest of this that we're talking about, I'm actually really curious to see what people think about this because, like I said, I think that this is just as big, if not bigger, for the G5s. I think that we just had Greg saying that he doesn't expect this to happen this week, and that's good to know. But once this does come out, if this is truly happening, I would not be shocked at all if we start to get a lot of talk about G5 schools moving almost immediately. The amount of value that they bring together by coming together for something like that, because you got to think between some of these conferences, you might have one or two good schools in a year. But if you start to come together, you can start to say to these networks, hey, there's a better chance that we have 4 good teams or 5 or 6. So with these G5s, you want to have a little bit larger conference so that you can increase your odds of having a good postseason tournament for people to tune into and be interested in. So I think that that's the first movement beyond the Big 12, beyond the ACC or Big 10. I think you'll see G5 movement. So that's what intrigues me.
You can imagine them doing to supplement Black Friday games with the G5 Friday, right?
Yeah, of course.
Depending upon the timing of that and just, taking it and owning it itself. There's games on that day, but some of them wind up being duds. They can make a bunch of games on a somewhat traditional, but not fully packed, 4 games times 4 channels kind of day and make it a big deal.
And if, the idea that you're selling a G5 regular season game on a Thursday is probably kind of like, people are a little over, right? It's a little oversold. But if those games are actually part of, who's going to make it into the postseason, and now we see that at least one of those teams is going to make it into the CFP, and in the future, we'll see how it goes. But I would say that adds value to those games to where these networks might want to put them on a Thursday and a Wednesday, and maybe more in prime time because that's not in competition with the major conferences. So these G5s might be looking at this saying, hey, this could help us stay in the game. Like before, it was just like, oh, we want to make as much as we can. Now it's simply staying in the game. It's having enough money so that your athletic department can operate with these new expenses. So they need this as much or more than the major conferences do.
David Frame says venue sports will probably get delayed until next year because of the federal antitrust litigation brought by Fubo TV. As far as I know, they've talked about launching this month.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part because he's not wrong. That's still ongoing.
Yeah,
and there's some other congressional representatives who are trying to get the Department of Justice to go in and look into this. So it seems like they know that there's stuff sneaking up on them, and they want to get this out and rolling and visible.
Yeah,
it's almost like they want to beat this.
Unless there's a massive injunction that blocks them from doing so, I don't think that's going to happen. Because if you go down the antitrust side of the equation, most of those things take a couple of years to work their way through, if not longer. They can go on for a number of years. So I don't think it's likely that those big powerhouses are going to wait 2 or 3 or 4 years to launch this. I think they're probably, unless they get an injunction to block them, they'll probably launch and just deal with whatever penalties should they want to be on the losing side of a court battle, or just use it as a negotiating point for a settlement.
Seems like a hard case to win though when you have a precedent such as Hulu TV.
Correct.
How are you going to say that the government needs to step in and stop this when they didn't step in and stop Hulu, and that was literally all the major networks when that first started.
Right.
They all had a quarter of it, and it didn't get stopped. So
it did not. And they also, Fubo's still going to have ESPN content. They're still going to have Fox Sports content. They're just not going to have it in a centralized place. And by definition, Fubo is a centralized place for people to watch those other channels. And Fubo is not broadcasting every single game that's in the ESPN Plus app either, right? So
I think they're playing for a settlement. I think Fubo is.
probably. Stormy Cyclone says pods would also bring more regionality and less travel costs. I think we touched on that. But I will bring this up. If this is the Big 12, how do you break up them pods, guys? Somebody's going to be very unhappy.
I'm putting Colorado back with their old Big 8 mates. I mean, right now with the 16 you got, it's the Arizonas, Utah, BYU. Colorado goes with Kansas, Kansas State, and Iowa State. Probably go Tech, TCU. Are there 4 schools down there?
There's 4 schools in Texas.
I'm trying to think if I wanted to go with those 4 because, and then I guess you got your West Virginia, Cincy, UCF. Because see, that's where I was thinking Houston had to go with them. Oh, and then Oklahoma State could go down with the Texas schools, or you could put Colorado with them if Oklahoma State wanted to go with the Plains states. But either way,
there's nothing that says your pods have to stay the same each year either.
No, yeah. I mean, that's technically kind of, that's their way of forming 2 divisions. But yeah, you could change that up.
Yeah, you could go divisions, aka pods, or you could just make sure you're rotating through. I mean, it's annoying. It's like trying to figure out 4 trains leaving from Chicago at different times to different destinations kind of stuff, and people be confused each year. But it's just building within your schedule that's going to change every year anyway if you're in the Big 12 the way it is today, with a few protected rivalries, right? So you just have to do a different version of that with some protected rivalries.
The Big 12 could do that probably a little bit easier than like the Big 10 could. The Big 10, Mullins already touched upon it. Ohio State, in this type of a situation, if they do this, Ohio State and Michigan are 100% going to say we have to be in the same pod. If we're not going to play the last game of the season, we sure as hell want it to be in one of the last weeks of the season.
Yeah.
And if you're not in the same pod together, that's not going to happen. So I think like if the Big 10 was to do this, it'd be very rigid. Who you're with is who you're with because the big dogs say so.
But is the Big 10 in that case going to want to have a situation, or Ohio State and Michigan, where by doing that, they guarantee that there's no chance that those 2 schools can meet in the championship game?
100%. And that's why it's not the optimal situation. The optimal situation is when you can do it as a postseason and when you can facilitate something like wild cards. So that way, the one who wins the division goes on, but you could still have, say, if Michigan wins the division and Ohio State's 11-1, Ohio State was still making it as a wild card because you're going to get less money from the networks if you're telling them that in any given season you can't have both Michigan and Ohio State in the postseason. It will cause the price that they pay for that to go down.
I'm going to butcher this name again. I apologize. Kaylani L. What conferences were considering a pod system recently? I know the SEC and ACC were. Any conference that already considered the pod system is likely to be one considering the flex semifinal format.
At some point in time, everyone's considered it. It used to be the broad consideration to try to get around the 2 division system. Some have been more open about it, that they thought about doing that instead of the modular scheduling system that most of them have gone to now. But it's not a new concept. I guarantee, actually, I'll go ahead and guarantee it. All of them have toyed around with the idea at some point in time in the past. So yeah, this was originally came up as a way to get around the 2 division system rule that the NCAA was holding in place.
Illini said, how many games will ESPN and Fox put from their inventory only on Venue? None.
Yeah, no.
It's all just going to be, you're going to have access to ESPN, Big Ten Network, SEC Network, ACC Network, Fox Sports 1, Turner Sports. It's just basically going to be a streaming package of only those channels. Now, when it comes to regionalization, I don't know how they're going to pull that off. Because they're, regional games, if I'm watching ESPN, I'm going to get a regional game here. I might end up with Iowa State versus Cincinnati, whereas somebody else might end up with North Carolina State versus Duke.
It's an app though. So,
Right. So are they going to list every regionalized?
You might have more access like to this than you would through cable. That might be one of the reasons why is they find more people are spreading out, but they still want to have connection with their teams where they came from. I would think that's be one of the advantages to having this, especially when you're selling at the price point that they're talking, is that you can get access into more regional stuff that's not where you're located.
Yeah, I think you're going to get unless they do tiers to get there, but I think you're going to get every game. And if they're smart, they're going to give you, how they do Monday Night Football or the championship games. They might not give you 7 different feeds, but everyone pretty much has a Skycam now, right, on the wires. So I wouldn't doubt if they give you a couple of different feeds from it. I wouldn't doubt if ESPN and/or Fox have. I don't think they put it there, but you could see a world where they bring in the home and away radio feeds if they own the rights there down the road, so you can hear a local announcer sync to it, because they've done that as well in the college football championship games. They've had the SEC channel have like radio, the home radio team doing that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot of things that they can do that are beyond just the conglomeration of the basic feed that everybody sees on those channels on Fubo or Hulu for that matter.
Nick M says you could put Ohio State and Michigan with that team out west and Washington in a pod. They're not that team out west. They're Oregon. Stop it. Masito says this is why you do fake pods for the Big Ten. Michigan and Ohio State wouldn't be in the same pod, but can keep the rivalry game. Also allow both to go to the semifinals. Easy to do.
Well, I'm kind of wondering if he's talking about the idea of when this becomes an actual postseason tournament, or if he's talking about the idea presented by Greg, where it's being done during the regular season, at the end of the regular season. If it's like what Greg is saying, you really can't. And you could attest to this.
Rivals in the same pod.
Yeah, like no one can say this much more than me. As I'm just saying this as an Iowa fan watching the conference. Michigan and Ohio State are going, nope. If we are not going to have our game as the last game of the season, it has to be near the end of the season. And just not having it as the last one, I think that they were going to think most of the times. And so they're going to want to set up their pod so that the other teams in the pod aren't likely to be ranked ahead of them. So that way they are the final game for that pod of the season. So that's going to get more than likely gamed. Whoever they're put with, consider it probably like a Michigan State and an Indiana. Like it's going to be two teams that don't like it, at least in the short term for the next 2 or 3 years or so, that don't beat out Michigan and Ohio State, so that way their game can be the final game. It's going to be one of those manipulated situations probably.
Yeah, it's interesting. Who knows where everybody ends up? But, I have to imagine Ohio State, Michigan won't be the only ones. I mean, Minnesota, Wisconsin will want to protect the Axe game. UCLA, USC would probably want to protect that game.
The conference is going to want to protect Iowa, Nebraska's game, have that in the last week.
Yeah. So I don't know, guys. We're just speculating here and postulating. We don't know the answers to any of this. We're just guessing as best we can. Jose says venue seems to be mostly for the cord cutters,
which is
if
becoming.
you don't want all the bloat.
But I mean, I don't know how, if you're pricing aside, because everyone has different situations. Like when you're on, YouTube as a cord, a swap out for YouTube TV as a swap out for your local cable company or one of these streams, and you're a hardcore college football fan. Like once you're in that zone of being able to watch multiple games at once and jump into any one of them at a time, it's super hard to go back. And I don't even think that's just cord cutters anymore. Like I know people who have cable and don't have that ability to do it, who would probably get venue just from the ability to have 4 games on their 84-inch TV or whatever size screen they have at the same time in a way that you just can't do with most of the digital old school cable companies have set up.
I agree. Let me get to another one here. Vox Quindara's in the chat says, good evening in Rock Chalk. Sorry I'm late. I'll still give you a Jayhawk squawk. Even though you're late. Mosito X. You create the pods at the beginning of the based on conference rankings and pools, top 4 in pool 1, 5 through 8 in pool 2. Then set up the pods based on the schedule that is going to be in the new season. You may have lost me there. This might be like Rock and Rant said, 4 trains leaving Chicago at the same time. I think I see what you're saying. You're going to just have new pools every year. 1 through 4 in the same pool, 5 through 8 in the same pool, and then.
But that would be based on like preseason, opinion. Like, you really can't win with that. Like, you can guess, but I think that they're probably going to want to stick with some of their more, at least in the Big Ten. Like, now, if you take that idea and you go to the Big 12 with it, maybe they do. Maybe they're willing to do that and really throw it around. But some of the other people saying in the comments, for a conference like Big 12 now and the Big 10, who have these larger areas that they're covering, this becomes an opportunity to kind of control travel, to keep some of your local games happening more often. So I tend to think they'd go geographic. But if they look at it like this and they absolutely want to maximize and they find a way to do this to where, they get a little boost from the networks for doing something like this, yeah, that's possible.
Line 9 Ted says, are these companies going to drop their channels from current streaming services such as Pluto TV? Is that part of their lawsuit? No, they will not. They will still be there.
Like, think of HBO Max kind of thing
as
a better example, right? HBO you can still get, and then there's Max, and you can get, through your cable provider. You can just go direct if you don't want the rest of what your cable provider adds. It's just the same thing.
At least as long as there's current deals up last. I mean, once those current deals run out, there's no guarantee. But yeah, if there's a current deal in place, it'll still be there.
Dogs and Dubs says, bring on the geographic pods. I hate that Nebraska doesn't play Minnesota this year. So he's already got that pod figured out.
Yeah, Yep, that's probably, be a good Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin.
Still trying to figure out how ACC goes to pods with 17 teams. I know there's probably some weird thing you do, but I can't figure it out. Like Big Ten,
I just want to figure out the pods. It's what? It's SMU, Cal, and Stanford. Who are you putting in that pod with them?
I don't know. Whoever else you want to go to Ratings Oblivion, BC.
Boston College.
Well, Wake Forest. Like, put all like the the people who draw 12 people in a game. Put them all there. Everyone on the far right side of any Ute chart we've seen.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we get another invitation. If this happens, they invite one more team, or maybe Notre Dame makes that decision.
Yeah.
After they've already destroyed all of the camaraderie in the conference, now they go, okay, sorry.
Well, I think it'd be more along the lines of, it's been pretty clear from Notre Dame that if they should ever lose out on a pathway, that's when they would start to consider joining a conference. If this is happening, then this also means that those conference tournaments are going to happen when the new governance happens. And if those get tied into, like I was saying, directly going into the CFP, the national tournament, and that's maybe all starting to look like it's set in stone, yeah, that might push Notre Dame to make a decision. Whether it's the Big Ten or the ACC, I don't know. But this could be along the lines of what pushes Notre Dame.
Illabuck. I love the Illabuck trophy. Does the Big have the balls to put University of Michigan, Michigan State, and the Ohio State in the same pod? Just curious. We've been in the same division with them, so I don't see why.
Yeah, I can see it. I mean, what else are you going to do with Michigan State? Like, what? put them maybe over with a Penn State pod, but I think
I maybe add Northwestern to our pod because I think you got to keep Indiana and Purdue together.
Yeah, you could do that, or you could even go wilder and go Ohio State, Michigan State, and Illinois. Illinois,
There you go.
You guys. I think
Bring
Ohio
back
State.
Caleb
Like,
Buck.
you've been saying it. Greg has been saying that Ohio State's going to have a lot of say in these next couple things. And
Yeah.
So Ohio State would probably pull for Illinois.
Nick Samarikov says, I think the West Coast teams in the Big Ten should play
Yeah.
each other every year. I agree.
That's the easy setup, is those 4 schools.
MGC Sooner says pods have the logistics, help the logistics for spread out conferences like the Big 10 and Big 12. Pods, though, need to be equivalent quality to be accepted.
Yes and no. I mean, that's one of the cool parts about when you go to more than 2 divisions is you don't have to have full equality. That's what you have rankings and seedings for, right? Like if you have 2 standouts and then 2 that aren't as good, well, your 2 standouts play the 2 that aren't as good. And then they more than likely come together at the end and you have 2 standouts. So I get what you're saying, and you want to have as much parity as possible. But when you're no longer stuck at 2, it's not as necessary. And in fact, to someone who's looking to game the system a little bit, it actually helps the conference to have a little bit more of a predictable tournament, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Plus, they're going to play another pod anyway, right? So right now, when you get to 20, if a conference goes big and goes to 24 and decides to do, 4 divisions, pods, or whatever, of 6,
Mm-hmm.
then it really depends upon whether they go to 9 or 10 conference games. But even then, you're still going to play a decent amount of teams outside of your pod or division if you're turned into something bad. Now, or you do like the Big 10 if they went to 24, or Big 12, you could do 8 pods of 3, right? And so you still get a lot of playing outside of a quote unquote weak pod possible.
Yeah, 8 would be that much more complicated. But remember, like if the Big 10 does decide to do this, you can't just look at the current schools. They're not sitting at 18 to do this. So you'd have to figure out who your 2 additions are. And I see Lee out there saying Penn State doesn't want pods, but if Florida State was added and Florida State and Penn State were put into a pod together, I think that would be pretty awesome. And I think that might be the one team that Penn State wouldn't mind having a rivalry with. And you stick them with Maryland and Rutgers, and that's pretty much your pod. And you and Rutgers, or you and Florida State, are going to have that, second to last game of the season rivalry game pretty much every year. So,
or you just have USC drop Notre Dame and force them to play Penn State every year.
Yeah, that's that one will hurt there for the. If that was to happen, that would sting a little bit.
It might. Let me get to this real quick. Illini Ted says Big just got rid of divisions, so if they do pods, there would need to be a lot of answers for the issues that the divisions have.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it just got to be 2 divisions. When you get up to 16 teams, that's 8 teams. That's 7 games a year. That only leaves you 2 games against the other 8 teams. Once every 4 years, you see every other team in the other division. If you're not having any type of like cross division protected games or whatever, I can tell you for the core schools, that's not going to fly. The ones that have been together for a long time. I don't know if you think about that the same way, Moen, or not, but that if you got, I don't know who you'd want to say, like a Purdue and an Illinois, say they end up on the opposite sides, they only play once they're not going to like that. Iowa and Penn State, there's a bit of a rivalry there. It's not really a big sold rivalry, but I know the conference doesn't want those teams to only play each other once every 4 years. So, that's it's that's why they did that. It's because they knew that once they got to 16, two divisions just does not work. That's why they're playing around with pods. That's why the big name, when you look at it, the way they have it set up, the I and the G look like a 1 and a 6. Like it was always alluding to 16 teams.
But there's 18 teams.
There is now, but when they did that, it was to go to 16, and so that's why
We
now
just gotta
they're
figure out how to. They're probably waiting. They're not going to do any more of these number illusions until.
yeah. They can't. They can't. We're already so past that. That's why I think like the Oregon and Washington choice, they were kind of like, yeah, we weren't ready to do this yet, but all right, we'll go. So
I'll just have somebody else be a guinea pig, right? Some other smaller conference will test it.
Oh, absolutely. That's why guys were saying Big 12. I'm saying yes. I'm saying watch for like a Mountain West AAC type of a situation.
Yeah.
And they're not going to want to leave a Liberty at that point in time sitting in Acusa, because look what they did. They stole that spot. So you're going to see them maybe cherry picking a little bit. You know, if USF is going up to the ACC or the Big 12, they're going to have to steal FIU or FAU so that they still have a Florida presence. Not shocking that FIU is doing their little pit bull maneuver at this point in time. You can't tell me that they aren't aware of things going on and doing what they can to be seen and set themselves apart from FAU. You know, people look at that and think it's not a big deal. Well, before that happened, if you were to point out those two schools and say pick one, I would have picked FAU.
I'd still pick FAU.
I don't know.
I still go to Boca and play games with the stadium overlooking the ocean.
Miami, though, like like these details, and I respect that. I'm saying to your average person who's paying attention to this, I'm looking at this saying, well, it looks to me like FIU's in this to get into this. They're doing things to try to be enticing to possible network partners, because I mean you're not going after FAU or FIU for their gameplay right now, but if you can have a game that's showing there, and we also happen to have a Pitbull concert that's going on that gets to be aired as well, and he's bringing in artists to play there. It's something that they have over FAU, and the timing of it is very conspicuous. So I think that the people are starting to make moves for this.
Let's see here. Lee says, hold on. I can click this. Here we go. I wouldn't mind playing Florida State, but hard to get excited about playing Rutgers in Maryland. Don't sleep on Rutgers.
Well, Rutgers could be good, but they could still be sleep-worthy. Greg Shannon's not exactly known for exciting football.
Right. If the conference mandates this $22 million figure from the House settlement and mandates that all schools have to do that, wouldn't that bring more parity? I mean, sure, you're always going to have your haves and have-nots. Ohio State's always going to get the best recruits because they're Ohio State. Penn State's always going to get the Pennsylvania kids because they're Penn State. But don't you think that would add some parity to the conference on some level?
Well, I think to overpay for certain players and then to have like that name brand, but they'll still be surrounded by, lesser talent getting paid to go there versus somewhere else. Like I don't. Either they spend that money, I just don't really see it necessarily making it. They have to prove it on the field and then get the right coaches and staff to make it more exciting to be there. And it's going to be hard, even with the money.
I mean, I get to a fan. You look at this thing. You want to have as many fun games to watch as possible, but you need to understand that this is a business, and they have network partners, and they need to try their best to make sure that they don't want surprises. Surprises happen, and that's what makes the game great and fun and chaotic. But to them, they want it to be as predictable as possible. So yes, you take a Penn State and a Florida State, and you take them with two schools whom both of those should beat every year, like a Rutgers and a Maryland, and that becomes predictable. Now you can start to make deals off of that. You can understand like what are the odds on who makes it into those final games and goes forward. It's most likely a Penn State and Florida State. You take Penn State and Florida State and you put them, say you want to have your best ones possible. Okay, you put them with the Ohio State, put them in with the Nebraska. Well, now the networks are looking at this saying, okay, well, now you're cutting schools out that we want to showcase. So yeah, it comes to you put your best brands in a pod with some of those that aren't as much, because you're trying to game the system to make sure that the networks and the viewers are getting the games at the end of the season that they want to see. And that's just the truth behind the scenes for you.
Nick M., the AAC has been wanting to form a Super G5 conference across the country and use pods. They should be the test conference.
I agree. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. But I think the Big 12 will do it too. But I think that the best test case is down in the G5s. And if you give them a chance to kind of go first, test it out, that's a bonus for them as well. And then you get to see how it worked for them. But I think that the Big 12 would be out and running with this from the start as well.
Lee says the Big Ten couldn't do this until the next media deal anyway, because they already have the media partners paying for a 9th conference game. Well, you can just move to 10 conference games.
Right. Or you just
probably.
Or if you're doing it within the current thing, you're just flexing game 8 and 9 or whatever format they do.
Yeah, because these really are just conference games. But they're tinkering with the scheduling.
Yeah, they're TBDs versus playing at TCU.
Yes, like it's instead of, like, we get that now. You get such and such teams playing such and such team, time to be determined of when it's going to be on. Now, instead of having that, it would be like the matchup is all TBD, and everyone's just going to have to be used to knowing that. Get prepared, because you're going to be trying to sell tickets in a very short amount of time.
Like conference game 8 and 9 are not going to be open dates for anybody, because you have to flex into it.
And that's another reason why they want it to be as predictable as possible. They got to sell tickets for these games in a short amount of time.
Well, that's the other question too. Do we do this as a home game system, home and away?
I don't know, man. I mean,
or do we do it as an independent? Is Indianapolis
it's during the season? Like, these are numbers that your athletic departments budget on, and they've been budgeting on for years. Like, what's making up for that if they lose that home game at the end of the season?
Well, you could just make it be that, yes, they definitely have to figure that out, right? Because you just can't yank a quote unquote home game from somebody that way. But it may be one of those things from a logistics perspective that, the higher seed gets the home game, but the revenue split's not the same. I don't think they're going to put everybody in like Indianapolis, because then you're asking everybody to travel to that, plus then travel to the title game, plus then potentially go to like X amount of playoff games, of which 0 to 1 of them might be home games. I think you just maybe change how you split the revenue on a school that loses a home game, getting it back. Like, and I don't know if that actually works math-wise, but in theory, it could be better than completely yanking a home game from somebody in this kind of modeling.
Yeah, your scheduling logistics, though, the way they do it, some teams have more home games in the beginning of the season and some have more at the end. Like, it just kind of works out that way. But with this, they couldn't do that. Like, you're going to have to try to even it out throughout the season, because there's a certain level of chaos to it. Like, you just don't know. And when you're talking about one school splitting money with another school, okay, well, what if their stadiums aren't the same size? What if they don't charge the same for tickets? It benefits one school much more so over the other. You see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, but the flip side is somebody's going to have, if you're doing 2 weeks of flexing games, right, in a 9-game schedule, it's very difficult to plan that you're not going to lose one home game by doing it earlier in the season, because by definition you're taking out somebody's home game later in the season. I don't know if they're going to be able to get everybody's 6 in, or however many conference home games that they normally get, depending upon the school. Like, I'm not sure how that works out. That makes it be like there's 13 trains leaving from Chicago. I could barely do the 4, and Moen can't do the 4, so we're kind of in trouble now.
The math is tough. I know Greg, he tried his best based upon whatever he was told. I don't think that there's an easy answer to this. And
I mean, I asked ChatGPT and it said, no way, bro.
Yeah, like to me, this is like just advancing a talking point because they already wanted to be talking about this. They already thought they'd have their governance in place. They already want, like, this is just like they're probably trying to stick to the schedule, even though that their settlement's being pushed back and governance being pushed back. I don't know if this thing that he's talking about we ever even see it. Like it just kind of seems like they're talking about the concept with language that exists now. Like we don't have more than 2 divisions. You can't do it. We don't have more than 1 postseason game in conference right now, so you can't do it. So they're not talking about it as if it is, because then they're basically talking about governance. They're telling you what's in the package already, and it hasn't been approved yet. You don't want to piss off the judge. You don't want to, you don't want to risk it. So I think they're talking about this concept in the language that we have now. And as you're seeing, as we're trying to figure it out, it's a big headache. Yeah. I don't know if they actually get it figured out and would even want to do it, or if they're just, like I said, they're just talking about it with the language.
It's the Detroit Auto Show, and the concept cars are coming out there, and we may never see them.
Well, maybe they want to see how much money they're going to get out of it. I mean, if they can get an extra $30 million divided by 16 teams, I know it's not going to be as substantial, but I mean, that's an extra 1.8 million per team. I mean,
if you're a team that's sitting there going, we can get up to 18 to pay these guys, but man, where are we finding the 20 or the 22? That makes this much more. You might take the pain because you have to. Like when normal times you wouldn't do it. You'd be like, hell no. But you have a need now versus just a want.
And I will add this, talking about conference games. We do know that when PJ Fleck had his dalliance with UCLA this past offseason, his new contract stipulates that there's a 10th conference game pay increase in there. You don't put that in there unless you have some idea that there might be a 10th conference game.
Yeah, I think for the Big Ten, that's pretty much a thing. Like once you go to 20, and if they're going to go to 24, you're not making it on 9. I mean, and you're talking about a national conference. You really don't need more than 2 OSC games. You're already, like, where do you want to play in the country? We're going to have someone there. You're going to get there via the conference. So I think that for the Big Ten, I think they're going to be one of the forerunners and moving to 10.
Nathan Campbell says, I think it's your new TV provider for the Big 12 is Amazon Prime and True Sports.
Could be.
We're
trying.
winding down here, guys. We got about 10 more minutes left. 10 more minutes left. So any outstanding question you want to have for Mr. Immaculate has to be a super chat, and then I'm going to give him as much time as possible here to break out and break down this development in college football.
Yeah, we've gone into this real heavily. There's not a whole lot more to break through. So if anyone's got any questions, even just throw them down there right now and kind of help lead the conversation in a way that helps people understand this. This is a very old concept. This goes back before 2014. This goes back to the last generation of leaders, and to see it still there, it's very interesting. And
they just can't quit you, man.
Well, like I said, they are control freaks, and they want to control everything about it. And there's good reason for that. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons why I thought, no way do these people want to do a super league. There's schools like Syracuse and West Virginia whose leaders are part of that. Nebraska, I get why they would push it. I do. But they're the minority. They're not the majority, in my opinion. So seeing this come out, I think this is good for the community and for people out there who just kind of want to know, like, what direction are we going? I think this helps to showcase, look, the plan is still the same that it's been for years. It's just how they're trying to figure out how to get there.
Illini Ted brings up a great point. Pod speculation doesn't surprise me as the plan seems to become the NFL light. Pods are very similar to NFL divisions.
Well, I mean, college football has had divisions. I guess it's not an NFL thing; it's a college football thing. We needed more divisions, and NCAA rules don't allow for it. Like there is an exact rule that says you can only have 2 divisions. They want more; they're not being given it. That's one of the reasons why they threatened in 2014 to leave. It was not just overpaying kids, although that was the main reason. There's other rules they want, but they didn't get that then either. And then you saw the CFP come out. So they've wanted more divisions. They've wanted more conference postseason, but there's also an NCAA rule that limits them to only having 1 conference postseason game. Why? I don't know. It's the NCAA. It's politics. It's you'd have to have someone in there who's dealing with all of the entities there to know why some of the others are holding it up. But as soon as that new governance comes out, from everything we've seen and heard and hinted to, Dellinger's been pretty much direct about it. They're going to be able to create their own rules on this. This is kind of a heads up. This is look. This is where we're looking to go. The way it's presented is a little messy, but I think that was great. Struggling with the current rule setup to try to make sense of how they can do this at this time.
CFB Plus says, I think Fox goes in with the Big 12 to pay for the semifinal games. It makes too much sense. Well, again, CFB Plus, you might be right, but give me a number. Give me a dollar figure out there. I want to see how much you think you can get for 2 additional games.
I mean, especially because I think one of them, I think they are taking 1 game from the Big 12. But they're taking from the Big 10. NBC's taking from the Big 10. CBS is. Fox might go heavy with the Big 12 on this, maybe, because like I said, once you get to this kind of stuff, it can get a little limited. But when it's in the regular season, it really doesn't change what networks are.
Right, it's just what you call it.
Yeah, you're calling it something else. You're saying this game has a little bit more meaning to it. But some of the.
Greg added that they could be for different time slots, so we could see this as Friday night doubleheader on Fox. Semi-final weekend for the Big 12.
Yeah, if that's the Big 12 trying to showcase, you're probably gonna
and
have
more
to
money,
move around and be seen.
RT brings up a great point. Big 12 wants to shore up CFP money first. Keep in mind that Brett Yormark has a look-in 2028. Did he put that look-in knowing that he was going to possibly do this?
Yeah, and also you can't think of everything being like sequential. That's not how this stuff necessarily works. It certainly can, but he can be trying to do 2 different things at the exact same time, right?
Oh, yeah.
So,
but I mean, like the way that they get rolled out can be sequential, but that still doesn't mean you're not planning out multiple stages of that. Like you gotta have this work done in advance.
Yeah, I mean, you could be doing this next year.
Yeah, and once the stuff starts popping off, I mean, we call it dominoes for a reason. Like once the stuff starts kicking off, you're probably not slowing it down. So you want to be ready for every single stage of this as it starts to pop off. So yeah, even if it's like 2 or 3 stages in, he's still got to plan for it and prepare for it as best as he can.
Let's see here. Expedition Greg says, I'm so ready for 13 more days. That's right. Less than 2 weeks now, guys. Less than 2 weeks.
It's going to be a different season when we're looking at this. Some of us saying, I don't know if I want my team to make it to the conference championship game. Like there's some new elements to this season, which it's going to be fun to see how it plays out. Like look at that. I want Iowa to go 10-2 or 11-1 and not make it to the conference championship game. That's never happened before.
Well, here's the thing too. Think about it. These semifinal games make perfect sense if you've got two teams on the cusp. Having these conference semifinals might be enough of a push to get that second team in, that third team in, that fourth team in.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be some level of chaos to it. And I think personally, this year is a test case. They're going to want to see how this all plays out because they can make as many plans as they want, but I think we just kind of need to see how this plays out.
Yeah. To me, the biggest thing to find out is what is the CFP playoff committee going to do in placing people in, and how are they measuring stuff, and how are they jerking the 13th team or not, right? From a conference, knowing that the 12th slot at a minimum is going to G5. Like, what happens? Do 2-loss teams get in ahead of 1? Does a 3-loss team from a massive conference, there are 3 losses, where by 1 field goal to teams in the top 6, like, until they know that that's going to like warrant whether these playoff games could help you or hurt you within conference, and whether they tweak that one way or the other, because it's still their rules to make, right? We all know what happened with Florida State this last year, which was ridiculous based off an injury. There's nothing that says the same thing isn't going to happen to team number 11.
But
right?
that's
It's entirely possible.
Like, if it's not Alabama, that's that other team, I don't necessarily think they do that same move. Like, that's the team that gets the most numbers for the network, and so that makes the payout the most for everybody. So you can't even like count on like any SEC team getting that favor over FSU. I don't think that's the case. I think it was like a very specific situation that happened, and that's the case for this year. Is as much as we think we know about how it's going to go, and as much as the playoff committee can sit there and say, well, we'll do this in the situation, that there's going to be some curveballs that come out of left field that they're just going to have to look at in the moment and say, well, this is what we think. And that's going to set precedent. And that's, like, as you're saying, so much of this in the future could be based upon how that goes, because right now we just don't know. We don't know if, like you're saying, does a 9-3 team that had an amazing schedule get in over a 10-2 team that didn't? Say if it's Notre Dame, 9-3, Iowa, 10-2.
You know what way they're going on that. It's Notre Dame.
But that's the thing. This is it exactly. But you could come up with another 9-3 and another 10-2, and that may not be the same case.
Yeah, I agree. It's also it's hard right now without seeing Notre Dame's schedule and Iowa's schedule in front of us, right? To judge them.
On those two we can, because Notre Dame's schedule is actually for real, and Iowa's schedule, I'm saying, is kind of a cakewalk. Except
I mean, I don't have Iowa's memorized.
We have Ohio State, and that's about. The rest are all winnable. It's not.
And what do they do to credit people? Like, I'll give a really bad example. NC State in the ACC, who is a top 25 in a lot of people's views, has a really easy schedule, but that's not their fault. That's just the luck of the draw that they got on paper. The ACC conference schedule is one of the lighters. It's SMU and then got really favorable draws. They're still also playing Tennessee out of conference, right? So how does that get weighed to the things that were in your control in a world where no teams in any conference currently among the bigger schools, I honestly don't remember how SEC is doing everything, have that, elite coastal division. The division thing is really not there for at least a few of them. So it's hard. It's out of the team's control. So how does that factor in versus, hey, they did, they played somebody strong from another power conference. They didn't have 3 cupcakes outside where they had the ability to schedule. That's what we need to see. I'm convinced that it will never be as bad as what we saw with Florida State and this past year, but we will see something that a lot of people are freaking out about happen this year, and maybe even more than one.
And keep in mind that when we say that this is a test bed, it's not just for who gets placed where. They're also testing how well the home game system works out this late in the season. Where does it work well? Where is it an absolute mess? Because if they're going to do this thing where we move into the, adding weeks for conference tournaments once they have the rules, they're going to have to start looking at, okay, what happens when we're going into December with these games? So that first week of the CFP, in my opinion, it's not just test for the CFP, it's test for conference tournaments, because those are home games. They're not neutral site games. And when I hear home games, I'm thinking, well, that's what conference tournaments would be, because in the conference, you're not going to have your entire conference tournament if you're the Big Ten at Indianapolis. You're gonna want some of those games to be home games, so that your better teams have that advantage to go forward. So yeah, there's a lot to this year to watch and see how it plays out, and that's going to end up determining some decisions made in the future.
All right, one last question, and we will wrap it up, gentlemen. Illini Ted says, I'm really interested to see how the playoff committee treats gaudy record P4 schools that played a very favorable schedule.
Mm-hmm.
We just talked about that. Brands matter.
Yeah, it's reality. We saw it play out. The number one brand, in this age for the viewership, they got the call. And I guarantee there'll probably be at least one case where we look at it and say their brand got them in.
Yeah, listen, number 13 is going to be pissed off. If we went to 16, number 17 would be pissed off.
Yeah.
There's always going to be somebody pissed off. Rock and Rant, anything you want to say on the way out?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. I have the August 15th up. That's just a reminder that in theory, those who have been talking about whether any ACC schools are going to announce anything, that is this coming Thursday. If they were announcing that they were going to leave in order to be in play for the 2025 season, there's definitely people out there that have been adamant that will be a thing. A lot of others that won't. And some that seem to have a very flexible moving target, as if we have a selective memory, but that will come to an end, and some L's will probably be given out to somebody on one side of the equation this week. And then I know we'll be revealing some of the other conference predictions and top 25s this week. I actually did have a new show with Miami Flow, who some of you guys have seen a couple of times on the channel. That is this Thursday. It's a general college football show, not just Miami focused. And hopefully I'm going to have one or two of our Big 12 Mafia, College Football Mafia friends on this Thursday. So I'll drop a link in the chat. And if you want to come check it out, that would be great.
Nice.
Yeah, just search Flow Miami, and he pops right up on YouTube, guys. So search that Thursday. What time is that again on Eastern time?
9 p.m. Eastern.
9 p.m. East. Okay, Immaculate, you're up.
Well, you guys know where to find me. At least most of you, I think, do. I'm just on X, Twitter. It's easy for me, on and off. I'm not sure how big of a week this is going to be. We just had Greg come on and say that he doesn't expect anything this week, but we'll see. But that's where you can find me. I'm Immaculate View on X, and on occasion, I still get to come by and hang out with the boys.
And we appreciate having you.
Yeah.
Like I said, it was perfect
Absolutely.
timing. It worked perfectly. We will give we're letting him take a victory lap here. He's probably, you don't see it now, but when we shut the cameras off, he's going to run around in a circle.
We're not quite taking the lap yet, but we're preparing the car for the victory lap.
He's taking a victory stretch, people. A victory stretch.
Hey, my car on no legislation before the election is warming up, to be clear.
Okay. Okay, we'll let you take a victory stretch on that one.
Okay.
We'll all take victory stretches. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Tomorrow at 8 p.m., Big 10 Mafia Show. Tuesday at 8 p.m., Big 12 Mafia Show. And then this Friday at 7 p.m., Big Freaking Friday Show. And Thursday at 9 p.m. over on Miami Flow's channel, this crazy guy over here with some other crazy guys. I want to thank everybody for coming today. I want to thank Immaculate for joining us. Rock and Rant, as always. We will see you guys next Sunday. Until then, peace out.
Adios.